Good morning, everyone in the Central Time Zone, and good afternoon in the Eastern Time Zone. Welcome to this month's Wild Wednesday webinar, sponsored by Apothecary Products, a Michigan manufacturing supplier for 30 years with a diverse line, including lanyards, pillboxes, and earplugs. We appreciate their support in making these webinars possible. Today's session is worth 1 CAS credit. If you know your PIN number, you can email it to paul@mipa.org, and I'll send it into PPAI and make sure that you get credit for today's presentation. This is being recorded and will be available. I'll be posting it to the MIPA Facebook page at the end of the webinar, and also it'll be posted at mipa.org on the Wild Wednesday webinar webpage. So if you want to share it or listen to it again, it will be available. This is presented as a cooperative effort throughout District 3. It's being promoted by TISPA, OPA, CPA Chicago, PPAW, and UMAP. Today's speaker is Joseph Scott. Joe is with Scott Associates in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and is really good at LinkedIn. He generates a lot of business from it. He's been a very active volunteer. I believe he was president of UMAP. He's served on the board of directors of PPAI, and a great industry professional, and glad to call him a friend. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe. Joe, take it away.
Well, that was one of the better introductions. Thank you very much, and greetings to everybody. What we're going to talk about here is how to use LinkedIn really. I mean, there's a lot of people who use LinkedIn, and we'll talk a little bit about some specifics, how I use it, some rules of thumb that I made up that may or may not apply to your situation, and show you a case study of somebody I actually met on LinkedIn or stalked on LinkedIn or whatever you want to call it, that's turned into a really nice customer of ours. So anyway, so we're going to talk about how you as an individual or your team, if you happen to lead a team of individuals, can get more from LinkedIn. And in my personal opinion, I think that it's probably the most underutilized B2B social media tool there is. So start off with a little statistics. I was kind of surprised to find out that LinkedIn actually started in 2002, and then when they got it ready to launch in 2003, their first month they had 4,500 members, which is pretty significant. Fast forward here to 2014, you can see there's 277 million members, and it is a worldwide networking system. Because of some client work that I'm doing, I found that my connections in other countries have really helped me get a feel for different types of marketplaces, or they have been able to connect me with people in different countries that are very, very knowledgeable. And for some of you who know me and some of the business that we do, we're heavily involved in the desktop 3D printer space. And we're responsible for rolling products out in Germany, France, and Italy right now. And of course, my client's been very helpful, but then I can rely upon my LinkedIn network to help as well. So that's kind of a side note, but I didn't think it was going to be of a benefit. To that point, 61% of the people who are on LinkedIn are actually outside of the U.S. And as far as, there's a bunch of people are searching for different things, different people. I did a little bit of math and figured out that the estimated average number of connections per member is 150. Probably the most important point on the slide here is that the reason why I think that LinkedIn is underutilized is that most LinkedIn members collect connections, but they don't really use it to grow their business. And not to be a smartass or anything, I've been a member since April of 2007, and I've got over 4,000 connections. Now, the reason why I put that there is that's really not as impressive as maybe it might seem. That's about, I think it comes out to about 3 per day, and all of the people that I'm connected with, I've either met face-to-face, or they have been at a session that I've given and they've sent me an email or something and I've connected with them on LinkedIn. And then there's been people who have been forwarded to me, by my connections, hey, you should meet this person. So with not a ton of effort, I've been able to put together a pretty nice, very well thought out network that has proven to pay some nice dividends for our business and for me personally. So I guess the questions is that if you're moving past the collecting connections, why should you really use LinkedIn? And I would say the thing I like about prospecting is it's probably the channel with the least amount of noise as compared to, let's say, email or trying to get a hold of somebody via phone. There's a communication device within LinkedIn called InMail, and some of you are probably already using it. What that does is that allows you to send a message to almost anybody worldwide on LinkedIn. It's a very professional way to approach people, and I'll talk a little bit about how I use it. Another thing that's pretty cool is that you can generate prospecting lists, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's also really good for awareness, because one of the things that I find is I, like many of you, like to go out to events and meet business people in the area. And the neat thing about it is you can tell in many instances who has visited your profile. And it's pretty common for me to go to an event, and of course we're exchanging business cards and so forth. But on occasion, there will be somebody who has not given me a business card who maybe overheard me talk or has met someone who's done business with me and they check me out. And that's really good feedback to determine, are you making an impact? Are you interesting people? Credibility is also really important because like I'm going to be 60 here fairly soon, so I've got the gray hair and the wrinkles that make me appear physically as if I know what I'm doing. The cool thing about my LinkedIn profile is when people take a look at it, and I'll take you through it, it's really complete, and people can get a really good sense for what our company has accomplished and then what I've done as an individual. Also, I find it really important, as I call it stalking. It's probably not a good term, but when I'm looking for potential clients on LinkedIn, there's a tremendous amount of information that people make available that will help you determine, what kind of a prospect they might be. So those are some reasons why I think, using LinkedIn for more than just collecting people is pretty handy. Here's a bunch of other stuff, and I won't go and read the list because you guys can certainly do that. We've already talked about maybe the first three. I also, too, will take a look at competitors of mine, and I have my LinkedIn profile set to public. So when I go and look at a competitor's profile, they can, if they look, they can see that I've been looking at their profile. Now, the relationship that I have with competitors, and I know there's some people from Minnesota, I'd say pretty much all of us view each other as colleagues more than competitors, because when you get really good in this business, you find yourself being so busy that it doesn't make any sense to try to take somebody else's clients because you're too busy with your own and working your niche. And then there's some other things we can talk about a little while later. One thing that I'd like to point out, and I didn't have a statistic on it on my first slide, is that actually more than 50% of the traffic on LinkedIn is people looking for employees or people looking for jobs. So if you haven't tried LinkedIn to find people to fill positions, you might want to consider it. And they have a very robust set of features for both job seekers and people who are hiring. So we talked a little bit about how you can use LinkedIn. This is a snippet of what the advanced search thing looks like. And I believe this is available somewhat in the free version. It's very robust when you upgrade to the $20 a month level. But anyway, One of the things you can do, if you can see right here, is that I happen to live in Chanhassen, and our office is in Chanhassen. So what I wanted to do is I like calling on people who are nearby. So you can see I've set this to my zip code in a 10-mile radius. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for people who are currently president of companies that are between 10 and 50 employees. As much as I used to like to say that I have done business with Fortune 500 company X or Fortune 500 company Y, I find that when you talk to the gal whose name is on the building, she can make decisions pretty fast, and you're either going to be shown the door or you're going to be shown some business. So this is just me. A lot of you guys are probably successful calling on big companies, and great, that's more power to you. This just happens to be what, how I like to do business. So anyway, so we do this and we generate a list. Here's an example of, this happens to be vice presidents, but you'll notice at the bottom there's a fellow named Steve Grady, and he is vice president of global marketing at a company called Symbet. And I didn't know what a Symbet was, but one of the cool things that I saw is we had 5 shared connections. So I did a ton of research on his company, understood the coolness of their solid state miniature, ultra miniature batteries and all the applications. And then I went and I connected with the people who he knew that I knew. And that really is cool. And what you'll find on LinkedIn is that some people are just connected and they really don't know somebody, but I was able to find a couple of people that I knew really well that knew Steve really well. So how you want to work that side of it is totally up to you. But I thought that was pretty important. So doing some pre-call research, and this doesn't show all of Steve's profile, but he has a very lengthy profile. And when you take a look at his summary, I mean, this guy has accomplished quite a bit in his life and has had a lot of international experience. He used to work for ADC. So I got a really good feel for him before I approached him. And we'll talk about how you approach people a little bit later. What I'll talk about now is how important it is to have a 100% complete profile. So I'll just use mine as an example. One of the things that is really underutilized is this piece right here. And I don't know if you want to call it a snippet. Normally what people will put in here is they'll have their company name. What I do is this is what we do for a living. We get customers for our clients. The reason why I put that in there is whenever I'm commenting on somebody's post, whenever I'm visiting somebody's profile, or whether I'm communicating with them on LinkedIn any way, shape, or form, it's got my company name and what I do for a living. So if somebody saw that Joseph Scott from Scott and Associates looked at their profile, they'd go, I don't care because I have no clue what this guy does. So that might be something where you can improve your profile by just adding a snippet. And please put in there what you actually do for a living, not what you are. So if you're a promotional products professional, nobody wants a promotional products professional. They want someone who can get customers, who can, create events that link, that sell stuff. I mean, whatever it is, but really make sure you're talking about what you do for a living, and then people will start to care. I'm fairly active posting. I usually post something about once a week, and we'll talk about at least a rule of thumb that I've come up with. But that's something that I think is really important, and it gets you in front of your network, because if you're not posting things or liking or commenting, this is kind of almost like a Facebook knockoff, you're not communicating with your network, and you really need to do that. Also, when you look at the bottom here, I've got a lot of connections, but I've got a couple of company websites. I've got a blog. I'm fairly active on Twitter, so if that's your style, you want to put that in there. Of course, it's 100% complete. And then down here, 5 people have looked at my profile in the past day. And for me, I mean, that's a pretty good day. So that kind of gives you an idea. And now I talked a little bit about a rule of thumb for posting content. This is what I came up with, and it's not really based upon too much, except it just makes sense to me, is that it's the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 content rule of thumb. Is what I do is that 1/3 of it is about business, just general business stuff. And I subscribe to a whole lot of newsletters, and I go flipping through them. And if I find something that I think is particularly interesting to me and would be interesting to my network, I'll post it and link, like that Nora Ephron quote. I also will do about 1/3 about our business. And this is not about, I have pens for 99 cents. It's, hey, we just got a new client, or we just went to South Carolina and shot video for US Foods, or whatever it happens to be. I'm not selling anything. I'm just saying, hey, we're doing some stuff, and here's who we're doing it for. You may not want to name your client. So maybe you could say, hey, we just shot a video in South Carolina for a major food distribution company or something like that. And then this is something that I do that might be maybe optional to you, is something personal. There's one thing that probably the most popular thing that I've ever posted was a video of Luther Vandross. I think it was at the Hollywood Bowl, just owning the audience. I mean, it was just an extraordinary video. I just thought that was kind of cool. So it's really up to you. And the word "right" with the little E on it is, I think I was trying to type Mexico in an email and ended up in there. So anyway.
Joe, we have a question about, do you post as updates or to specific groups?
Both actually, and thank you for mentioning groups. For updates, I do it as an update, and then I have my notification settings set for, I get emails from the groups on a daily basis, and there's some things that I'm not interested in, or some things that I post to. So with me, how I use groups is I answer questions, or I comment mostly on other people's posts. If I feel that I've got something really significant to add to the group, or a topic or something, I do it. But this is my personal preference, is that I just tend to answer. I try to be more helpful. So, but that's a really good question, and thank you for mentioning groups. So is that a good answer? Cool.
I hope so.
I hope so too. This is something that it's relatively new. Is before you could list skills, and there was a list of skills, and it was kind of cool. And usually people had about 100 of them. What they allow you to do now is you can endorse other people for skills. And I think this is kind of interesting, because this is how my LinkedIn network perceives me relative to my areas of expertise. And I think those of you who take a look in here, you'll probably, it's Pat Dugan right there. And I'm just trying to see if there's some other folks in the industry. But, there's Rod Brown. He likes me. He thinks I do public relations really well. But anyway, this is pretty cool, because people can take a look at it and go, oh, well, the dude, he must be pretty good at this kind of stuff. Now, we spend most of our time doing websites, but I don't do that. So this is something that's pretty handy, and I really don't care. I have a bunch of customers in here. I really don't care if somebody knows, like Terry Johnson is a customer of mine. I really don't care if somebody knows who my customers are, because if they want to go and call on them and they can do a better job than I am, well, they shouldn't be my customer. So anyway, that's just me. Another thing that people find interesting is, what have you done relative to getting certifications, and what's something unique about you? So I've got my MAS, mobile marketing. I just retook these. So this is important in our world, to let people know what you're doing. If I have a pilot's license, I haven't put that in there. But this has actually gotten us some business. As you guys know, international business is pretty much, if you're not doing business internationally, either you're a local retailer or you're missing the boat. And the fact that my parents shoved me in Spanish when I was in 7th grade has actually really paid off, because I get hired to go to trade shows to sell in Spanish, which is actually kind of cool. So if you speak another language or you have an interesting skill, it's really important to put that in there, because you never know what's going to happen. Also, you can put a portfolio in your LinkedIn profile. Now, this happens to be a couple of websites and just a little description of what it actually did. We have a whole bunch of them, but this is really cool because people can check your work. And I really like that, because when you have a conversation with someone who has really been through your LinkedIn profile, they know quite a bit about you, and they can determine if you're, qualified or not qualified. So I think that's kind of fun. One of the things that I actually make a pretty big deal about is that I'm a published, I guess if you write an article and it gets published, you're an author, I guess. The folks at PPB Magazine have been very gracious in that they let me write articles for their magazine, and surprisingly enough, they actually publish them. And I think I've got maybe a dozen of them. And now, what does that mean? What that means is when somebody takes a look at it, if they're looking at Joe the pen guy, which that's who I was in 1993 when I started in the business, what I want people to know is that I'm not Joe the pen guy. I mean, I'm a published author. I've actually got a couple of PowerPoint presentations on that people can download if they want. So, I mean, this is a really serious tool for us. And people think that's kind of cool. And it shows that I've taken the time to put my random thoughts together in a format that a skilled editor will publish. Also, too, this is kind of cool. Recommendations. Now, I don't solicit these things. So these are people, and you guys probably know Jim Sochi from Artistic Toy. He just posted this one time, and I was very, very grateful for that. But you can see, other people, and I think these things, when you read them, you can tell that I didn't write these things. So it's kind of exciting, and people like to see that you've done work with people, that you're easy to work with, you know what you're doing, and so forth. So and if Jim's listening, thank you very much for that, because that's almost brought a tear to my eye when I got that. Here's, aside from having, ways for people to contact you, I think it's also, the thing I like is you can see here, these are part of the groups. I think you can belong to as many as 50 groups. You may not want to be members of 50 groups, because if you're a member of a group, you really need to participate. But someone who looks at my profile can tell that, well, we have an Audi and we're involved in that. I'm a Rotarian, member of Coffee Talk. And then I happen to do a lot of work for clients in the intellectual property or patent and trademark area. So I follow conversations. And if you follow a vertical strategy in your selling, I happen to do a fairly good job with attorneys, a lot of people in the intellectual property area. You probably won't be surprised how many times people will see a comment, they'll look at my profile, and they'll realize that I'm not a patent attorney, nor do I play one on the radio. And they'll send me a note and they'll say, hey, that was a really interesting comment on freedom to operate. How do you know this? And then when I tell them that I was a Renta chief marketing officer for a major intellectual property firm for 4 years, they kind of go, oh, well, how'd you like to work for my firm? And then this is actually Island View Golf Club. This is the country club that I belong to. And I set up a members only networking group for my golf club. And that's one of the things that our pro uses to sell memberships, is that this is a formal way where Island View members can learn about each other and do business. So I thought that was kind of a cool idea. Actually, it wasn't my idea. It was our pro told me to do it. But anyway, the question is that what if a LinkedIn profile falls in the forest, does it make any noise? I don't know. I just kind of made that up. But the bottom line here is that I like to know how I'm doing. And this is a graph that shows in the last 90 days how many people have viewed my profile. And this is the thing that's kind of interesting is that Maker Media, that is a magazine. I write articles on behalf of clients that I send to different people in the media in the hopes that they'll publish them and give my client publicity. So I'm obviously making an impact because a couple of people, and you can click through and see this, so I know a couple of people at Maker Media are looking at what I'm doing. Viewers who search for titles, so they're looking for a vice president of some kind. And this one here is pretty interesting, viewers from the management consulting industry. Because they take a look at my picture, they can tell about how old I am, and they can look at my background. I actually get, I'd say a couple, 2-3 times a year, I'll get a phone call or an email from a management consultant who is working for a company that needs a marketing guy, or they need a website or something like that. So this is something that's just happened recently. So when you're out there, you never know who's coming in, but it's nice to know who it is. And oh, by the way, there's the Steve Grady who looked at my profile. Now there are some people here that block that information. I'm not really that concerned if I'm looking at somebody's profile and they happen to know. Yeah, it's just me. You may want to do something different, but this is a good way to say, is there any interest being generated? And this guy's obviously interested because he looked at my profile. So the next thing is how do you approach somebody? And a lot of these people, I don't know who they are. I mean, I've never met them. If I can find if I can get their email address, if I have their card, I'll connect with them using that email address, and that indicates to LinkedIn that you've probably met them, or you have perhaps some sort of a relationship. One of the things you can do too is that when you take a deep dive into someone's profile, you can see the groups that they're a part of. And if that group is a group that you can contribute to, then by all means join it. If you're joining a group just to connect with somebody, that may or may not work. I don't know. But as you saw, I've got a lot of memberships, and I participate in intellectual property groups. And on the previous slide, that guy right there is in that business. So that's one way you can meet people. But this is an example of I was driving around through a neighboring town, went past a building, and one of the things I always look at is I always look if there's a for sale sign, or if there is a new logo on a building or something like that. That's a new business who moved into town. And so what I did is I did some research on this particular, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was Demand Quest. I was trying to remember the name of the company. But I found the president, guy's name is John Livingston, and what I did is what I wanted to talk to him about is marketing co-location data center space. Now that subject line is not a spam subject line, and InMail is very tightly regulated, if you will, by LinkedIn. And you can see down at the bottom here, my current InMail feedback score, I get 5 out of 5 stars. So I'm very careful about who I try to send an email to. I'm very careful about what the subject is. And then my style is very conversational. And I just said, hey, John, I was on my way to visit a client and drove past your building. having never heard of your firm, we did some research and found that we have a bit of experience in your field. We are an ad agency in Chanhassen and have developed some decent skill sets that apply to your marketplace. If you would like, and this is really the key thing here, if you would like to begin a dialogue, you can accept my email and we can go from there. So it's who I am, how I found out about you, what do we do for a living, perhaps why John should care, and then I'm just saying it's totally up to you. And given my in-mail feedback score 5 out of 5, pretty much everybody accepts my in-mail and responds to it. So if you want to put that in your toolkit, really take some time. Usually it takes me about 10 to 15 minutes to really perfectly craft an in-mail, but it's a very nice way to introduce yourself to somebody in a very professional manner. So the question is, I've kind of talked about a number of different things, and this is actually a slide that a client of mine put together. I did a presentation and some consulting for them, but from my presentation, this is what they came up with, and I was pretty happy that they let me show this. It's from a place called Pivotal Advisors. Those are those guys down in the corner. But this is kind of how I do stuff, and they put it in a nice form, is that you start off by prospecting, and you can use that advanced search feature that we talked about. And then when you get the list of profiles, then you start looking through those profiles and do some research, just like the guy that I saw with the miniature batteries. The reason why I picked him is I just thought his company was cool. So, I mean, I didn't do like a deep dive, but I started researching through his profile. And then I connected through, I went to his website. And one of the things that I do, and I was talking to Paul about this may seem a little bit extreme, but if it's like a smaller company, I read every word on every page of their website. And I know there's probably some of you probably shaking your head. Nassanau is probably shaking his head right now. But what happens is, I would say maybe 20% of the time, I'll find a punctuation error or a misspelling or an extra space or something like that. And you would be pleasantly surprised as to when you send, for example, let's say I contact that person and I say, oh, by the way, here's who I am. I found your profile on LinkedIn because I'm looking for vice presidents of companies. I thoroughly went through your website, and I noticed on page such and such in the second paragraph, you used the word there instead of there, and I just thought I'd point it out. Now, for a marketing person, that's a really significant piece of information. It may appear trivial, but if there's a mistake on a website and then someone took the time to study it that deeply, that indicates a certain level of either weirdness or attention to detail or both. And people find that somewhat attractive. So that's kind of the level that I go to. But, it works for me. It might not be your style, but it's my style. But once you make that contact, then the first thing they do is they go right to your LinkedIn profile. Who is this person and why should I care? And you have to think of your LinkedIn profile as like a newspaper article where that first paragraph is who, what, when, where, why, and maybe some how. And you want to encourage them to start stepping through. And in the case study case that I'm talking right now, I knew that they were going out for a very large round of funding. And I also knew that nothing was going to happen marketing-wise until they got the funding. So I contacted Steve and I said, here's what I know and this is what's going on. And I also understand that you're probably not going to be interested in meeting with me until such and such a time. And he was pretty impressed that I knew that, although it's all public information. And what ended up happening is that a while later, he sent me a note and he said, I'd like to meet with you. So we went and we sat down and he said, well, and that's what's cool about talking from marketing person to marketing person. He said, well, let me tell you why I am talking to you today, which is a fabulous thing to know. And he said, well, first of all, you thoroughly researched who I am, what my company is, and the funding part of it and the timing part of it. And I really appreciate that because I have a lot of salespeople who are trying to sell me stuff today. I don't have any money today. He said he also appreciated the way I had approached him, where it's, here's who I am, this is what I do, and if you're interested, the ball's in your court. He said he liked that. And then when I went to your profile, I saw you look like you're about my age. Your company's been around for about 20 years. You speak Spanish. And he went through a whole bunch of things that he found in my profile that made it valuable for him to meet with me. And I was really impressed by how serious he was. And he's turned into a really, really great client of ours. So that's kind of what happened there. And then it's also important too, is you take a look at who's viewing your profile. And, of course there's going to be random people in there, but it's really important to check that out and just say, well, who are these people? Where are they coming from? And there's absolutely nothing wrong and there's nothing creepy about when somebody looks at your profile to contact them. I mean, if there's somebody who's interesting to you, or maybe somebody you've been trying to get into the fold, there's absolutely nothing wrong with sending them a note just saying, hey, thank you for looking at my LinkedIn profile. Is there anything that you saw that was particularly interesting, or, whatever your style is? And initially, when they first revealed that feature, it kind of creeped people out a little bit that they knew that they looked at your profile. But now it's just like, if somebody on LinkedIn gets creeped out by somebody knowing that they looked at your profile, I put those guys in the same category as people who go to a Chamber of Commerce networking event and people are talking to them. It's just kind of weird. So anyway, having said all those things, LinkedIn, what I do is actually pretty easy to do. The thing is that it's also easy not to do. And when I look at kind of my world, and it's probably for those of you who are selling, your world maybe looks kind of like this, is that this is what we want to be doing. We want to be, that's what we have to do. We're salespeople. We need to sell stuff, closing sales. However, and that is important, that is the most important and the most urgent thing that we can do. Now, in my mind, I think that prospecting on LinkedIn is maybe it's not as important at closing sales, but it still is very important because if you read my bio, I get between 30 to 35, maybe sometimes 40% of our new business from prospecting. So that feeds that. This other stuff, if you're a company of one, you really have to blow this stuff off. It's really hard to do. Now, the nice thing is that because of my wife's ability to run our company, I have people who can take care of stuff like that. But the reason we have people that can take care of this stuff for me is that I got fairly good at this and I got really good at that. So anyway, it's just like running is easy to do, but it's also easy not to do. So the question that you may ask is, well, how do I turn this into a habit? How do I fit this into my day? And one of the things that helps me out is an activity log, and I hate paperwork. I don't like doing it, but it is kind of cool for me. And this is what I did today. Prospected for these guys, got the list done. I found there's 10 people in there that I'm really interested in. Took me 15 minutes, and I'm going to say that's a high value. Now, do I waste time on LinkedIn? Yeah, sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm just poking around looking at stuff. And so I'm not going to tell you that I'm disciplined to be 100% on my game all the time, because I'm not. But this really helps me focus on what I'm doing. And the important thing is a little bit of an assessment. How did it go? How long did it take? And then what's your value? So, and this presentation will be made available. I think, Paul can help you with that, or we'll figure out some way to get it to you for those of you who are interested. So there's that part of it. Now, some of you may be responsible for sales teams. And this next part of it is something that is directed specifically at you, is that it's very, very important to make sure that everyone on your sales team has a complete profile. And you can either do that yourself, or if you have admins to do that, they really need to go through and look at, how many connections somebody has, the groups that they're involved with. Now, there are some very successful salespeople in our industry who have never been on LinkedIn and probably aren't going to ever be on LinkedIn. That's fine. But for, perhaps younger people, I've done actually a fair amount of LinkedIn consulting for larger distributors in our industry. And the feedback that I get is that it's been very helpful, especially for the younger kids, to get established that way. But one of the things the admin has to do is to go through LinkedIn and have make sure that their profile is 100% complete. Something that's also really important is that you must have a photograph, and it must be a photograph that shows, most of your face, and I talk about a little bit about this later. So that's important. And then you can feed this back to your sales teams, and you can print the profile out and say, hey, could you fill this out or fix it? And then you can have the admin check weekly for progress. It will pay dividends. So to be effective at LinkedIn prospecting, we'll talk a little bit more about the completion, is you really have to have a professional picture. And what my recommendation is for clothing, like when I make sales calls, I'm wearing a suit and tie, and I'm usually overdressed. However, that just makes me feel good, and that's just my style. I mentioned that at a session when I was speaking in Orlando last year, and a bunch of people came up and they said, you're freaking crazy because nobody makes sales calls in Miami in the summer in suits. And that's exactly right. So if you're making sales, if your territory is in Miami and you call on people who would cut your tie off if you wore one, absolutely you should be wearing a polo shirt. But it's all about your style. But it's really important to be dressed. What do you wear on a face-to-face sales call? And even inside sales, because more and more inside salespeople are using video chat and video Skype and GoToMeeting and that kind of stuff. So it's important. And I've found too in my business, we do video Skype with people all over the place, and I get dressed up, so it's kind of cool. But anyway, this may sound kind of corny. Make sure that the profile is impressive as they are. Everybody who's listening to this call is impressive. And the reason why I say that is when we compare ourselves to ourselves, we're average. However, when we get to compared to other people, and just the fact that you guys are furthering your industry education puts you in the category of being one of my colleagues and not one of my competitors. We're all pretty impressive. Maybe we're not impressive to ourselves, but when you go and you lay out the things that you've accomplished, the projects that you've done, and the great thing about promotional products is that in the project section, you can take pictures of that really cool promotion that you did. You can talk about the return on investment, and that will differentiate you from the person, the Joe the Pen guy. Work history is kind of interesting. People like to know where you've been. Volunteer positions, there's people who are interested in that. I happen to do a lot of stuff for the Rotary, and I get contacted by other Rotarians because we have a thing, we have a Rotary thing that we understand. Skills and expertise, of course, this is really good because if you happen to have somebody in a particular industry who's looking for some promotional or some marketing help, and they happen to look through your profile and they say, oh, this person's done some work in the food industry, it's very, very important. Also, too, blog is a 4-letter word. It's very, very difficult to find the time. I'm lucky that I happen to like writing. But then, of course, if you go to my blog, I think I have maybe 5 or 6 blog posts. I usually write a blog post every couple of days for my clients, so it's like shoemaker's kids, but at least I have some. But the bottom line of your profile is when you consider your audience, you want the audience to say, oh, that's why I want you in my network. So it's basically what LinkedIn is. A dating site is basically what it is. My guess is the accuracy of the information in a LinkedIn profile probably exceeds that of those found on Match.com or eHarmony by a fair amount. So anyway, just a little something about just reinforcing the 100% complete profile. Also, if you really want to take a deep dive, we actually put together a formal relationship with a winery yesterday. And for those of you who are not from Minnesota, there are quite a bit of wineries, and that's because the University of Minnesota has developed a whole bunch of grapes that plants that can hang around when it's 30 below zero and bear the next year. So I thought, well, since we just put together a relationship with a winery, maybe what I should do is I should go and look at them. And so this is kind of a checklist that I put together. My profile it's like a self-assessment. You guys, I'm not going to read all this stuff to you, but this was a productive use of my time, yes. And as a manager, especially as a sales manager, salespeople hate to do stuff like this, generally speaking. However, a disciplined salesperson is a formidable competitor and a valued colleague. So the question is are there other ways you can leverage LinkedIn? Well, one of the things that this kind of maybe a duh, but one of the things is that since I've invested so much time in my profile, I make sure that it's on my business card, my email signatures, and you can see some of the other things. It's also kind of cool if you're a sole practitioner or a small one. There's absolutely nothing wrong with sticking that link to your public profile on your website. It's a good way for people to get to know you, and you can put way more information in the LinkedIn profile than you can on like a contact us page. So maybe a lot of you, or at least I anyway, I started off using the free version of LinkedIn, and as I got to know it a little bit better, I found out that it was important to gain some other features. So I'm going to talk about why you might consider upgrading from the free one. I happen to use the business one, which I think is $20 a month if you buy it for a year. So that's $240. And it's about 15 minutes a day. So of course you have to look at your time. I don't have to sell a lot of coffee mugs to cover $240. But more importantly, this is a formal way that I can increase the business of my company, and more importantly, make payroll every couple of weeks. But I would, if you're serious about this, I would consider going to upgrading to the business thing, because what you can do, one of the things that's important is that there's, first degree connections, which is like Paul and I are first degree connections. Second degree connections would be somebody that Paul and I know, but it's like a second level. Third level, there's a whole lot of people on LinkedIn that I don't know. So the neat thing about upgrading to business is you get to see the names of those third degree things. And then the in-mail part of it, where you can buy these in-mails and you can get introduced to other companies. So that's pretty handy. So you can consider it, but you can also do well on the free version. So to wrap stuff up, We talked about it's easy to do, but it's easy not to do. You really need a routine, and for me, I'm not particularly disciplined. So what I do is I carve out 15 minutes of my day, and sometimes more, to just work on LinkedIn, to find people, to communicate with them, to post. Also, too, if you happen to find a list of 150 people that you think are prospects for your business, probably what you want to do is say, well, I'm going to contact 2 of them a day and keep track of it. And then we talked a little bit about start and stop times. I mean, there's some forms you can utilize. But one of the things that I found here is that, as I mentioned earlier, by sending out a couple of connection requests every day since April of, so I've been on LinkedIn for, what is that, 7 years or something like that. I've got 4,100 plus connections. And one of the neat things about that is I find that the size of my LinkedIn network is actually very valuable to my new customers, because what I'll do is I'll say, hey, a reason why you want to connect with me on LinkedIn is I have a really large network and I may know somebody who could be a customer of yours. And I found this out. I was consulting with a promotional products distributor who was part of a larger firm on the West Coast, and he wanted to get into the local public TV station in his town, a fairly good-sized town. So since I was consulting him with his firm for LinkedIn, I kind of made a smart remark, and I said, well, let's see if I know anybody there. So he gave the names of a couple of people that he wanted to meet, and actually one of them was a fraternity brother of mine, which was really cool. So in the greater part of his ability as a salesperson and the track record of his company, he was not only able to get a meeting, I kind of helped with the meeting, but they turned him into a really nice client. And that I got really excited about that, because that's really what we're trying to do as promotional products professionals, is to help people make money. And whether you're a consultant or whatever you do for a living, that's really important. So I guess the bottom line of the whole thing is, what are you going to do? It's totally up to you. Hopefully you're a little bit somewhat motivated by what maybe 1 or 2 things that I said. Hopefully you can turn this into making some money. And one of the things, if you're really good at LinkedIn, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't bill for your time. And here's something like the Pivotal Advisor guys. One of the things that I do is if I'm going in to pitch people on LinkedIn Consulting, it's really easy to have yourself or somebody else to go through and find everybody in Pivotal Advisors. These are actually guys that were going to one of their meetings. They brought me in to speak about LinkedIn. And so I went through and here's all the people. Actually, this guy right here became a customer of ours, and he wasn't at the meeting. But anyway, so I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and I'd like to thank Sir Paul, the Chairman Kiwi, MAS, for inviting me to do this. And I guess we've got a few minutes for questions. So Paul, I'll just turn it over to you, and I'll see if I can help the attendees.
All right. Well, thanks, Joe. We do have a few questions. Bonnie from Cleveland asks, what type of language do you use to ask contacts for an introduction to people you want to meet? And do you then approach the new person through LinkedIn or by phone?
Okay, could you state that again?
Repeat that? Sure. What language
Please.
do you use to ask? What language do you use to ask contacts for an introduction to people you want to meet? And do you then approach the new person through LinkedIn or by the phone?
Oh, that's actually, you mentioned something that I should have covered and I didn't cover. There is a section in LinkedIn that allows you to get introduced to other people. And what you do is you find the person that you want to get introduced to, find their profile, then you can you look through and you say, oh, geez, here's somebody I know. Here's one of my connections that knows that person. And then you send the picture of that person to the guy that you know, and then say, hey, would it be possible to introduce us? And then your connection can click a button, add a note, and send it. So you can start the communication by LinkedIn. But one of the things that I find is that I like giving people a phone call. I've been really surprised at how many people answer their phones now because so many people have stopped calling. But as far as language, I've got some examples. You know, if you want to send a note to Paul and then Paul can pass it on to me, I'll just copy and paste some stuff that I've typed in mails that have been successful, and maybe that might help you.
Great. Another question is, where'd to go? Excuse me. My thing. How do I get endorsed in categories that I want to introduce?
Oh, ask. For me, I actually haven't asked, but you know, when you have I've been around for a long time, so it's easier for me. But if you're brand new, ask. You know, there's nothing wrong when you're building your network. There's nothing wrong with connecting with your friends. And the cool thing when you do that is that you see who their friends are, and you can get connected that way. But I just ask somebody, you know, just send a note to one of your friends that you're connected with and say, hey, would you be kind enough to endorse me for the following things? And then there's also a quid pro quo. You know, if somebody endorses you for something, you should, you know, be good for them to introduce them. One of the things that I'm really careful about is that I only endorse people for skills that I personally know that they're good at, either because they've done that work for me or because I just know that they're good at it.
Great. A supplier asks, how are distributors going to perceive a supplier being active on LinkedIn? The old industry paranoia raises its ugly head again.
Oh, well, first of all, we will all applaud our supplier partner for being on the call because a lot of times our supplier partners, you know, don't necessarily have the time to take part in industry education. However, to answer the question, if you're a paranoid person, I don't think it would matter. I mean, for me, I actually like that because I'm kind of busy. I've unsubscribed to a lot of supplier emails just because I don't buy the product. When somebody sends me something or calls, I say, here's the person in my office who buys stuff. If you have an idea that can help me with a project or sell some of your product, you know, definitely do it. I'm all for having suppliers and distributors on LinkedIn, and I think it shows really good form. You know, if you're looking at looking for sales managers, or you're looking for product people, or whoever you're looking for when you're doing your prospect searching, I think it's entirely good form to seek those people out and contact them directly. What you want to really make sure of is that why should they care? You know, if you're offering, you know, a 99-cent pen on an A, that's not really valuable. But if you can say, hey, I can tell by your profile that you have expertise in the banking business. I've got a bunch of case studies where my products have been used to increase traffic in the bank, increase the amount of business loans, whatever it is. If you have something that's actually valuable, you need to approach people that way on LinkedIn and other ways.
Perfect. Another person asks, after the initial contact request and no response, how often should you continue to try to connect?
Well, I would try a different way because when you look at somebody's LinkedIn profile, if they have 20 or 30 or 50 connections and they don't have a picture and their profile isn't very complete, the chance is pretty good that they're really not active on LinkedIn. So if you try it on LinkedIn, then you might want to send them an email. You might want to give them a call. But like for somebody like me, you know, it says like 500 plus when you get to that point. If you sent me a connection request and I didn't answer, that's because I don't care. You know, you didn't convince me that it would be valuable for you to be part of my network. Now, I accept probably 90% of the connections because people have gotten better. But yeah, if somebody ignores your connection request, that might be because A, they're not big on LinkedIn, or B, you know, perhaps your reason that you wrote out why they should connect with you maybe isn't important to them.
Terrific. Well, thanks again, Joe. It's been a great presentation. Really a lot of information here, and for those of you on, we have recorded this and it will be published to the MIPA website, MIPA.org, under our Wild Wednesday webinar section, and also on the MIPA Facebook page. Also would like to thank Apothecary Products for their sponsorship of the Wild Wednesday webinar series, and also like to invite all of you to attend on May 28th, the last Wednesday of May. We have Joe Duran from Larlu speaking on the education market. As many of you may know or may not know, education is the second largest category of buyers of promotional products, and Joe Duran has lots of great information on how you can tap into that, keep the people that buy in that category, and why you should be selling there. MIPA would also like to invite those who would like to go to Traverse City, Michigan, a beautiful place. On June 4, we're having one of our Luncheon with the Stars series, and that information is also available at MIPA.org. If you'd like CAS points for today's program, send your PIN number to me, paul@MIPA.org, and I'll make sure to send that over to PPAI so that you get credit for today's webinar. And again, thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and look forward to speaking to you next month for another Wild Wednesday webinar. Thanks a lot.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye now.